Una cruz lleva en los hombros de madera muy pesada.
Y una corona de espinas que las sienes ya les y una corona de espinas que las sienes ya les
Scamming the U.S. government and smuggling drugs now haunt a Dalton, Georgia-based charity organization. Dr. Steve Foster started Corazón more than 2 years ago. Foster formed the group to help Hurricane Mitch ravage victims in Honduras, but his group has twisted into the eye of a legal storm.
Bob, Corazón, which is Spanish for heart to heart, has come face to face with the U.S. Army and Honduran government. The probes crisscross 3 countries and center on fraud, drugs, a fugitive, and murder. Dr. Steve Foster of Dalton, Georgia, says every accusation is false.
No, we are not involved in any form of criminal activity. That's not what we're about. That would be totally against our entire mission and our purpose. We're following one simple precept, and that's the second commandment that Christ articulated, and that is to love thy neighbor as thyself.
But Foster and his partner in Honduras, Russ Novak, hate the tangled web they're in. Novak oversees the food and relief shipping missions. But now he's a fugitive from Honduras, wanted for some type of drug trafficking charge. More than 2 years ago, the doctor started this mission to help the devastated victims of Hurricane Mitch. But the crashing legal waves now swirling around Corazón are drowning Foster's life.
I pray for signs, and I pray for understanding, and I pray for wisdom, and I feel that I'm doing exactly what I should be doing.
This is the story of a little charity called Heart to Heart, and how its founder and its tiny handful of volunteers from a small southern town found themselves mired deep into the swampy morass of Central American intrigue, literally up to their necks in murder, armed robbery, fraud, and cocaine smuggling. It is also the story of a man who answered a call many would have dismissed, and how it almost cost him his life. In the fall of 1998, Dr. Steve Foster was jogging along this road. Well into his 10-mile run and well into the euphoria known as a runner's high, he paused to make an assessment of his life. His medical clinic and other business interests were successful way beyond his expectations, and his marriage and family life were happy and untroubled. So, amidst all this euphoria, this student of the Bible offered up a short prayer of gratitude. But he ended his prayer with a question. He asked, in the manner of Gideon, is there something else I should be doing? Something special?
I'd laid a fleece out. A fleece that said, I'm happy doing what I'm doing, but if there is something that you really want, then you're going to have to show me, because I'm not going to do it on my own.
While on vacation with his wife in Jamaica, Foster had what he first perceived was a disturbingly vivid dream filled with the images of a raging tropical storm and masses of dark-skinned people being swept out to sea. It was only later that he realized that what had happened to him that night was something considerably more profound. And even today, more than 7 years later, the memories of that night continue to elicit deep emotions.
The vision began, I was writing in a journal. During this time that I was writing, I was very restless. It was as if I expected something was about to happen. Somewhere around, I guess, the first or second paragraph, everything just began to change and to sort of dissolve. And that's when I had this sensation. I don't know that I knew that I was being borne up by anything, because I don't remember that. I just remember being there at the place where I was having the vision. It was as if the whole river just jumped from its banks, spread out over the land and around the houses. And the waves then from the sea came in over this and they began to merge. And there was this merger of the river with until it was just a turbulent swell. You could see all these people and you could see them screaming, horrifying. And the next wave came in there and washed them right back into the river and into the ocean, and they streamed out, and the screams and stuff they came right through the rain, right through the wind. I tried to turn away more than one time, and every time I would try to turn away, it was as if I was just, like my will was just redirected. It's like, you will see this. What I saw was massive destruction and massive death. I mean, in my heart, I knew that this thing was real.
Foster returned to his hotel here in Jamaica and watched the weather channels intensely for any sign of the storm he had seen in his vision. Nothing. But 36 hours later, just as he and his wife were preparing to return home, a tropical depression began to form 200 miles southwest of the island. Did you draw any correlation at that time about your vision and what you were seeing on the weather channel?
Yes, I mean, how could I not? I was looking for the hurricane. I really felt like what I had was a prophetic vision. I felt like I'd been shown something that was going to happen. I thought it was going to be in Jamaica. All the people in my vision were black.
72 hours later, a Category 5 hurricane named Mitch slammed into the Central American nation of Honduras with 45-foot waves and winds that exceeded 200 miles an hour. It was the most powerful hurricane to hit the Western Hemisphere in more than 2 centuries. In less than an hour, its ferocity destroyed dozens of small towns. Many villages simply disappeared, the earth completely stripped of structure and populace. More than 40,000 people were killed, 1 million were left homeless, and the little country of Honduras was adrift in anguish. And though Foster had returned to his home in North Georgia and resumed his practice here at his clinic, he had continued to monitor the hurricane's path. But after the storm had bypassed Jamaica, he had become ambivalent about its relevance to his vision.
I had already dissociated my perception that the people that I had seen in the vision were black when the hurricane missed Jamaica.
But Foster sensed a power, a metaphysical power, that was drawing him to this hurricane and what it had wrought.
Even as I flew back into Dalton, I just kept having this strange feeling that I couldn't let go of this thing. You know, I wasn't off the hook. I was consumed by it. I'd never had anything like that been done like this vision before. Never.
What cemented his resolve, however, was what he perceived was a lack of urgency by the world powers to respond to this disaster.
So I called Washington, and I called the internet, and they would refer me to the International Red Cross or the American Red Cross. And everyone I'd call would refer me to some other group that they said that they thought was responsible. So it seemed to me really clear that the buck was being passed on this disaster, and that really agitated me.
Dr. Steve Foster is trying to organize this relief effort, and the outpouring has been tremendous, but Dr. Foster can't find a plane or fight the government red tape to fly in help. Foster's boxed enough medical supplies together to open a small hospital, but he can't get them there. All week he's called politicians, the Red Cross, government agencies, trying to find someone who will airlift this more than 40,000 pounds of supplies.
Foster's encounter with the paint-drying pace of government bureaucracy and the often turtle-like efficiency of international aid organizations made for a process that was painfully frustrating.
I have dealt with political offices. I have called directly to Washington. I have called the International Red Cross. I can't even get my phone calls returned.
Foster reacted to these problems with the zeal and tempo of the emergency room physician he once was, driven by his Hippocratic oath. an oath that makes no mention of proper channels and diplomatic niceties. After assembling his team of nurses and EMTs, and with his frustration mounting, Foster decided to forego any possible official help and chartered a 40-year-old cargo plane to haul his supplies directly into the capital of Honduras.
We landed in Tegucigalpa, and there to meet us was a person who identified herself as like a deputy to the Minister of Health of Honduras. She wanted to suggest that we work in some orphanages in Tegucigalpa, and I told her that we were going to go where the hurricane had came ashore, and I told her I thought we would be going to Santa Rosa de Aguan, and she said that the few reports they had suggested that Santa Rosa de Aguan had taken a beating, but there was no way we could go to Santa Rosa de Aguan. So she told me the reasons: logistics, there was no available transportation, there were no bridges. Then she gave the final reason, and she told us that it would be dangerous for us to go, that there were only 11 of us, and there were about 6,000 blacks at Santa Rosa de Aguan. And when she said that, I knew I had the right town.
That was when the first time you made your connection.
That's the first time.
It was truly an astonishing story because Dr. Foster's team, they saw the aftermath of families ripped apart, bodies floated out to sea, and the village devastated.
The team came with a mission. They treated more than 1,000 people, mostly kids, in a makeshift hospital. Villagers told the relief team most of their families are gone.
I mean, I was in tears. I just couldn't imagine what it would be like just to have your whole family washed away at sea. And there was nothing left.
Hurricane Mitch literally split the village in half, washed families out to sea, and turned homes into matchsticks.
I know I bandaged 400 kids, just stepped on rusty nails, running from the hurricane.
And the team's heroic effort made a difference for kids on the brink of death, a mission villagers say they'll never forget.
Corazón a Corazón nos donó medicina, comida, y es decir que un montón de víveres. Sí, no se nos ha olvidado, hasta la vez siempre lo recordamos.
The only wheeled vehicle in the entire town is a two-wheeled funeral cart that the people pull when they're ready to bury someone. For a lot of people, I think it was just sort of a vote of support that somebody in the world cared about them.
Now here's one incredible sidebar story. While in Santa Rosa de Aguan, Dr. Foster heard about people hurting in a nearby village. So he and an assistant got in a canoe, paddled to the village, and treated 80 people. They then walked 14 miles back to Santa Rosa de Aguan.
Overwhelmed by the vastness of the need, Foster decided to dig deeper into his personal monies and broaden Corazon's mission. With stateside logistical support from the carpet giant Shaw Industries and in-country help from Standard Fruit, Foster moved another 5 container loads of medical and relief supplies into Honduras. He and his team then used these surplus U.S. military boats to ferry the goods into areas where the need was greatest, areas where few dared to venture. Upon arrival, the cargo is then offloaded onto canoes and other small craft and ferried upriver into remote areas never visited by other relief groups. A wary eye must be kept while speeding along these uncharted waterways, not only for debris and submerged logs, but for the occasional alligator or crocodile. What the group discovered in these small, isolated pockets of abject poverty were scenes that would melt even the iciest heart. This young father of 2 had been stricken with the bends while working as a lobster diver. The industry outfits their divers with scuba gear but gives them no instruction in its use. Many end up either dead or, like Juan here, paralyzed for life. The villagers told the team about a little girl who cried incessantly. She was suffering from a kind of paralysis that kept her in almost constant pain. Her wails could be heard as the team approached. There was little Foster could do, so he decided, though she was too small for it, to go ahead and give her the wheelchair. When she was nestled into the comfort of the chair, for the first time in her life, the little girl stopped crying. Those who do this kind of work are sometimes rewarded in unexpected ways. Further upriver and deeper into the Mosquito interior, the team learned of the tragedy of a young woman. Crippled since birth, she had been ostracized by the community because of her infirmity. In her 20s, she had been raped by one of the local villagers. She and her son lived alone here in this mud hut. The earth surrounding this structure had been worn slick from 3 decades of her movements, dragging herself in and out of her simple home. In her entire life, she had never been more than 50 feet from this spot.
¿Quieres? Sí. Oh, yeah. We will. Okay? Okay. Okay, better? Aprobación. Sí, de esta. Perfecto. Josecito, Josecito, ¿no?
Igualmente. Yo quiero que me ayuden ustedes a mí, porque yo necesito una ayuda. Necesito de ustedes.
She said what you say? What she said is essentially that she's had no help and she'll take
Les agradezco mucho que esta es obra de Dios. Les agradezco
She's
mucho.
very poor and no one's helped her. It's just like us.
After receiving the wheelchair, her son pushed her 6 miles through the jungle to the small river town of Palacios. She was now a member of the community, and once again the team's commitment to its mission had granted it huge rewards. Foster now found himself completely consumed by the plight of those who lived in the Mosquito Coast.
According to one of the scriptures, our duty is to serve the least of the least. And in Honduras, the least of the least in their tiered society are clearly the mosquitoes and the Garifuna.
Beautiful mountain. And those are beautiful mountains. But the whole place here is beautiful. And what's happened is a place can kind of grow on you. Just like an animal can, or a people can, or even a group of people, a nation can. And you feel their pain and you feel their suffering and you want to do something about it. But most of the time, most of us don't have the opportunity to really do that. And I've been fortunate and blessed enough to be able to have that opportunity. And I don't intend to see it go to waste.
But nothing in Foster's gentle southern background prepared him for the peril he and his little charity were about to encounter. From day one, all of Corazon's activities, including rebuilding hospitals, churches, and clinics, and paying for fuel and crew costs for the boats, had been funded solely by Foster, from monies he had inherited from his father. But the months he had spent down here had sapped him both physically and financially.
All my financial resources and cushions were gone. I had to return to the States. I had a practice that was failing.
But before he could return home, he had to find someone to assume control of the boats and the promise he had made to the peoples here in the Mosquito Coast.
Russ came along at a time that we desperately needed, and I desperately needed, someone that I could turn the boats over to continue the mission. Russ Novak had the experience in the Bering Straits of Alaska. He was a fisherman, and he had a real desire to help these people.
But Foster was burdened by a secret he did not initially share with his new partner.
I carried this in the back of my mind, and I knew that ultimately that we'd have to pay the devil his due.
What Foster carried in the back of his mind was a meeting that occurred when he traveled to Panama to take possession of the donated landing craft. He'd met with a U.S. Army general and the general's aide, but then the general's aide had introduced him to one other man.
This man he identifies as an operative with the Joint Interagency Task Force for Drugs. That's the first time I realized that there was a trade-off involved in receiving the boats. They were looking for a partner. The job of this partner was to provide information about the cocaine trade into Honduras and into the Mosquito Coast. I suppose I was pretty naive, because what I didn't know was that by receiving those LCM-8s, the military landing craft, that I was signing on for what would probably ultimately end up killing a couple of people that were working with Corazón.
The sea and air lanes along the Central American coast are the primary arteries for the transshipment of drugs from South America. For months, Corazón had traveled these waterways by day and by night, moving hundreds of tons of supplies into the Mosquito Coast without any interference from the drug traffickers or the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. But when Foster's money ran out, they both came to call. In the fall of 1999, Russ Novak received an evening visitor to his home here. A visitor who could instantly solve all of Corazón's cash flow problems.
One of the, you might say, main traffickers came to the house. She just basically had a paper bag with her and slid the bag over and said, "This will be for you, and this is what I want you to do." I reached in there and pulled one stack out that was about this thick, you know, 2.5, 3 inches thick. It was all $100 bills.
Probably how much in that bag?
Well, I would say there was at least 100,000 with no problem at all. We knew what she was into, and I just told her I couldn't do that. God had sent me on a mission to Honduras to help the people and do all this.
And at the time, you guys had almost no money.
We were real broke.
How tempting was that?
You know, somebody would say it was real tempting. I'm going to tell you the honest to God truth. It was not tempting to me at all. I just don't go there. That's it. I won't do it, period. And so there's no money that would buy me off.
It has been said that temptation resisted is the truest measure of character. So be it. But Corazón was still broke, and the next funding venture to open up would provide a much smaller return and would carry a much greater risk.
To be able to carry those cargoes, I knew that we would have to serve the DEA. I told Russ the agreement that I had made with the U.S. Army in October of '99, and that's when they approached Russ.
They asked me if I would take on that responsibility of undertaking a project to find out where the stuff was coming from, who was moving it, and where it was going. We did that.
Russ Novak, under the aegis of Corazón, became the eyes and ears of the DEA.
Russ and Don. Don was one of our boat captains, Don Ware. One thing Don did have, and Russ had, and there was no question about it, was they had a heart for this work. And they suspended and put aside a lot of other things. And the only thing I can possibly say that either of them ever really got out of the whole thing was the experience of it all. Because they've suffered, both of them have suffered tremendously.
Foster knew that risk was not an alien concept to either Ware or Novak. Both had been Alaskan fishermen, an occupation universally accepted as one of the most dangerous in the world. He considered them another blessing, a blessing that would ensure that his work would go forward. But Corazón's association with the DEA was about to increase exponentially the cost of doing their good work. That increase was to be paid with their most precious currency, their blood. Jim Anderson Jr., a 20-year-old Corazón volunteer from Dalton, Georgia, stepped out of his truck here one pleasant summer evening and immediately found himself staring down the barrel of a .357 Magnum. He was forced to open that gate.
My son came through the door, and I had to look around him then to see what was going on. I saw two men come in with various rags over their head and face, and with weapons, pistols in their hand. I expected to find, a large sum of money. They didn't, so they took everything else.
A few days later, Foster and Paul Cantwell, a Vietnam combat veteran and Corazón volunteer, were delivering relief supplies to a coastal village.
A boat approached us from behind. They threw me a rope, which I accepted and took, and another of the guys threw another rope, which was more like a grappling hook, and it linked around our cable that ran around our deck. And as I looked into the boat, I could see their weapons. They had not gone for their weapons because they came as if they were just being friendly and smiling, and as they reached for their weapons, I realized that I was totally powerless. Paul stepped out of the wheelhouse with his shotgun, and almost as fast as you can imagine, 3 men in that boat lay dead. Paul had done what he had to do.
He saved your life.
He saved our boat, and he saved our life.
Next, boat captain Don Ware was shot.
There were 3 assailants, and they attacked Don while Don was returning from a trip into the Mosquito Coast.
He come walking right up like that. 2 of them with 9mm and 1 with an AK. I'm looking at his eyes aiming right at me, right in the chest.
Okay.
And I just said, well, Lord Jesus, I don't want to die. I'd sure like to finish what you set before me to do in life. My life's in your hands, and that's when I heard the 2 bangs. Went right into the center of my chest, right next to the sternum bone, came out right here between the ribs. The other one hit me right down here and came out there.
After each of these horrible events, Foster would pray for guidance, seeking reassurance that his vision demanded this degree of sacrifice. And like Gideon, Foster asked, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Sometimes the answer was subtle, but sometimes it was overwhelming. He was making house calls one afternoon when
a child came up to me and pulled at my pant leg. And I thought he probably was there for some candy, and so I reached in my pocket and gave him candy. He spoke neither Spanish or English, he spoke only Garifuna. And the interpreter seemed to be irritated by the child, so we went to another house and I treated another elderly patient. We came back out of the house and the child pulled at my leg again and really started talking with the interpreter. And the interpreter turned to me and almost apologized in a tone, asked if I had time to see a baby that was dying. This little boy, this was his little sister. And he had come on his own to get help. So I really didn't take it serious that the child could really be dying, because you hear it in America all the time, take care of this person, they're dying. And as an ER doctor, I'd seen that time and again. Well, I arrive at this little cottage, or we arrive at this little cottage, and there's a little girl that's in the door, and she's leaning against the door, and every part of her body is soaked in sweat, and she's not even moving enough air to wheeze. And she's clearly in her last moments, and her little eyes are just hollow and looking back, and her mother is right outside the door, and she's watching her mother, who's washing a little white, like a baptismal dress for this child, for the child to be buried in, because she's given up on the child. And there's nothing she can do. I picked up the little girl because I really didn't have any There's no need to grab a stethoscope. It was clear what was going on. The child was in the final stages, and she was really near death. Her lips were blue, and she was really about to die. And I picked her up, and I ran with her. And thank God I was in good physical condition at that time. And I ran with her back to the clinic. I was thinking, how will I possibly be able to treat this child? We had a spacer, an accordion-like spacer that I remembered that we had there, and we used that spacer and we blasted with albuterol, but looking in at the windows were the villagers. And I knew if I lost this child in front of those villagers, that probably our credibility was gone. We had her laid out on a large mounted stretcher that was mounted on a couple of tables. And I said another prayer, and within 30 minutes or so, the child broke. The asthma broke. Her breathing normalized, and within another 30 minutes, she was up drinking like an electrolyte replacement solution, and she was okay. We sent her home, and the next morning, she walked back to the clinic with her brother for some candy.
Foster was allowed but a few days of comfort, for the next week brought even more horror. Corazon's secretary, Aurelie Higginbotham, and her husband, Larry, are both murdered. The Charities Association with the DEA had now become deadly. Charged with the murders was this man, Robert Hale, a man Novak, in his role as an undercover DEA agent, had been investigating for drug trafficking.
Hale had been tipped off by someone that we were functioning as the eyes and the ears for the DEA in the Mosquito Coast.
Novak's world was now about to turn upside down. After repeated calls from an anonymous source, the La Ceiba police raided Novak's home and found what they said was a kilo of cocaine. But the night of the raid, neither Novak nor anyone else was home. It was Boat Captain Don Ware and his mechanic who drove directly into the nightmare.
We pulled around the corner, seeing the whole block lit up and lights and stuff on at Russ's house. I started to back out of there knowing there was trouble, and I had an AK shoved in through the window of my truck.
Ware and his mechanic were taken here to the city jail in La Ceiba and locked into a tiny 6-by-9 foot cell.
When I got to the house, my mother-in-law was there with the baby and told me, "Russ, you got to get out of here. There's big trouble."
In the process of tearing the house apart, they found out that I was working for the DEA. There was a lot of papers in there about Bob Hale, in particular. So now, whoever it was that found all this stuff was probably on the payroll with Hale and went running over there and told him, "Hey, this guy is not just Good Samaritan. He's looking into you."
Evidently, he had hired a couple guys to do me in, that they couldn't get a clear shot. So they decided to set the house up and figured they'd get me arrested. That was a simple operation. Get me arrested, get me thrown in jail, and they had some people waiting there to do me in.
I was told that the second day I was in there. Where's the gringo partner? They had one, this Russ character, that he was supposed to be picked up and taken care of in here.
Which is what the CID boys told me, that when they come back with their investigation, they said, "Russ, they're going to kill you, period." But he told me, he said, "If you can get out of this country, good luck." And I told him that I thought that our government should fly me out and my daughter and my wife. He said, "That ain't going to happen."
At this time, you realize that the jig really is up on you.
Yeah,
that Bob Hale knows, everybody knows now,
Yeah.
and that your life is in serious danger.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
For the next 3 months, Novak lived by night, alone and hiding in the city of La Ceiba, hoping to find some way to secure safe passage out of Honduras for himself, his wife, and his daughter. After repeated attempts on his life, Novak was forced to flee Honduras. He made his way into Guatemala, across Mexico, and finally back into the U.S. But it took another 3.5 years before his wife and child were allowed to follow. During that time, Novak reflected on his experience.
It wiped you out, didn't it, down there?
I lost everything I owned. I had $20 when I returned home. But we lived through it. We're better for it. So I guess I can thank the good Lord that I had the opportunity to go do this. I learned a lot down there.
Foster, meanwhile, redoubled his efforts to resolve the criminal charges that were keeping his boat captain behind those bars.
We were left in pretty much limbo land that I could be looking at 20 years sitting in there. They couldn't, you didn't know.
Don's trial took place in early November. And the night before his trial, I had been praying and fasting, and the answer came to me. It was very clear: make them test the cocaine. When it failed the field test, then it went for further tests, and as it turned out, it was an ingredient used in baby laxative.
In 2 short years, Russ Novak and Don Ware had become the most successful undercover narcotics operatives in Central American history, singularly responsible for the seizure of cocaine valued at more than $50 million. Like many Caribbean countries, Honduras is a study in extremes, the extreme beauty of its topography and the extreme pervasiveness of its poverty. Russ Novak and Don Ware made many friends during their years here, but it is the power of the enemies they made that prevent them from ever returning. In the fall of 1998, a general practitioner from a small southern town was jogging along this road. He was in good fettle, both physically and mentally. He was living a life that was rich and full and uncomplicated when he dared do what we are all so often warned against.
Be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. And I had asked for a direction. If God wanted to give it to me, there it was. You know, here's your chance. So, to me, that was a very, very strange night, and it changed my life, really. Because after that, I made a lot of decisions that have had a lot of consequences.
Could you have disavowed what the vision instructed you to do?
There's been a lot of times I wish I had, I've had momentary thoughts and wishes and hopes and that I could quit this and just forget it. But I made a vow, I made a promise. It was personal, it was between me and God.
Has this been a positive thing, a negative thing in your life? How would you describe this?
Oh, absolutely. This has been one of the more positive things in my entire life.
Even with people being killed around you, hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been spent, almost the destruction of your life and your old life anyway, it's still been a positive thing?
There's nothing in my previous life that compares to what we've done down here. In the States, I was just a doctor. Down here, I have the opportunity to be that and to be a true servant.
Is this where you'll spend the rest of your life? Do you see that?
I do. I believe this is where I'm intended to be.
Corazon's mission is powered by Foster's commitment to his vision and his commitment to his faith. The vision destroyed the man that he was and created the man that he is. Greatly flawed and greatly blessed. Foster answered a call, and it completely ripped his life apart. It cost him $1 million, his medical license, his reputation, his business. And some would say, in some ways, it also cost him his sanity. Throughout history, the line separating prophet from madman has often been indistinct. But such is the world of visions and dreams.